fireside chat with a number of key executives from the Gulf region. We're focusing here on building better businesses, corporate governance essentials for tech companies and small businesses. Here we will be highlighting how good corporate governance practices can help startups and businesses attract investment and funding, expand beyond their borders, or operate in different countries, hiring a remote workforce, and ensuring long-term sustainability for SMEs and startups alike in the region. Leading today's session, the expert in his field, Fahim bin Sultan Al-Qasimi. Fahim is the co-founder and chairperson of Seafood Souk and a prominent advisor and investor to high-growth companies in the Gulf region and internationally, focusing his advice to startups on importance of government practices. Unfortunately, Fahim has been called away on an urgent matter in the last half an hour and sends his regrets. He will try to join as a panelist. But in that note, I will be moderating today's discussion and fireside chat with key executives of top tech startups in the Gulf region and rising stars. Let's start by first introducing Tia Mervold. Tia is the proud founder and CEO of an award-winning and internationally recognized startup called GetBee. Founded in 2017, GetBee has developed an on-demand platform for all services and knowledge sharing, and an engine that empowers companies, schools, and social enterprises to join the future of work, the sharing economy, and to digitally transform the way people and companies buy and sell online. With a focus on technology for good, Tia and her startup GetBee has been recognized with numerous awards, including being an Expo 2020 Global Innovator, the Cartier Women's Awards, and Inc. Arabia's top female startups. Joining Tia on this panel is Timel Caesar, the group head of ethics and compliance at Careem. Careem, as many of you know, is the ride-sharing and services app in the Gulf region, founded in 2012. And in 2019, Careem was acquired by Uber in the largest ever technology industry transaction in the Middle East. We're honored to have Timel, who will speak about his role in developing and creating really the first dedicated department to business ethics and compliance, pre and post acquisition in Careem. Joining Timel and Tia is Bahet Youssef, the regional senior financial director at Talabat. Talabat is the largest online food ordering company in the Middle East, founded in Kuwait. Since 2016, Talabat is a subsidiary of Delivery Hero, a German publicly listed company which went through its own IPO in 2017. Bahet is steering the business towards achieving maximum profitability while extensive hands-on experience in directing and leading financial, commercial, and operational performance. And last but certainly not least, I'm honored to have Omar Al-Mahiri joining us today. Omar is the co-founder of Let's Work and joined as an entrepreneur in residence at Emaar, where he launched Let's Work in early 2020 with his co-founder Hamza Khan. Let's Work has already expanded from the UAE to other countries in the Gulf region and recently acquired a company in Portugal to focus on international expansion. I am honored to have all of the panelists join as we look at why corporate governance fundamentals at an early stage of a startup or a small business is important if you're looking to raise money from investors, expand regionally or internationally, or do business with large companies in government contracts. And with that, we'll just jump right into it because we have a very exciting panel and I know we have limited time. So I think I'll direct my first question, if I may, to Timel from Careem. The question is, we are joined by some of our tech unicorns in the region, other rising superstars, all who have prioritized and been on the ongoing journey of improving corporate governance standards. I'm curious, in your opinion, why should corporate governance be prioritized in the Gulf region by startups and companies alike? And what aspects are important to be considered at first?
Sure. Thank you so much to the Pearl Initiative and to you, Ranyan, esteemed panelists and guests for this opportunity and for joining today. It's a privilege to be here with you all. And I think your question is a pertinent one, especially to the startup world. As you shared in my brief bio, I was privileged to be with Careem, both pre and post acquisition. And my team, I would say, was critical in ensuring and essential really in ensuring that the transaction was successfully closed. So I think this perspective may be particularly helpful for those unicorns who are looking to scale and either go public or be sought after as a target for acquisition by a larger firm in this space. As many of you are aware, and as you've shared, Uber was acquired Careem for $3.1 billion in January 2020, which was, and I believe still remains, the Middle East's single largest tech acquisition in history. And so in M&A transactions of this scale, there are numerous milestones, but I think there are two particularly relevant dates in terms of the context of corporate governance. There is the deal date, which is essentially the MOU or a letter of intent of sorts. And then there's the closure date, which is the date when the acquisition is actually legally completed, and then the entities essentially become one. So, M&A contracts of this nature are essentially referred to as asset purchase agreements or APAs. And within these agreements, there are generally a lot of legal covenants outlining a slew of conditions that the acquiring company, so Careem in this case, would agree to comply with in order for the acquisition to be actually successful. And this is where a lot of M&A deals and even IPO deals go sour. And of course, while there are a multitude of reasons why an M&A deal can fail or IPOs can fail, from antitrust matters or regulatory or financial concerns, corporate governance is also a principal reason why so many of these deals actually do not end up going through in the end. And this is why I wanted to provide, this is why it's so important to discuss this issue, because it provides a lot of context as to the importance of this matter. And I think investors, by and large, accept that there is a degree of risk in any investment, of course, but all investors seek to hedge or mitigate that risk to the highest extent possible. And this is where corporate governance plays a key role in ensuring, as acting as almost like an informal insurance policy, really guaranteeing that the company's success can be sustained and that it's based on sound operations post-acquisition or IPO. So I know this was a rather long-winded way to get to your questions, but I think it's really important to provide this context and why this conversation is so important and relevant to startups, because we know that in the startup world, everything is about growth, right? Growth trumps all, and corporate governance and compliance can really seem like unnecessary impediments or stale conversational coffee discussion pieces. However, when you look at the end goal, which is acquisition or an IPO, when you consider the end game, that really couldn't be farther from the truth. So tech companies really should begin institutionalizing strong corporate governance and compliance mandates as soon as feasible. And really, they should, whether they're seeking acquisition or IPO, this is really an absolute essential. And as for your question of what is the most important to be considered, I would say as a compliance officer, it's important to consider having a compliance professional as a part of the executive team, which is really critical, because you really cannot underestimate the importance of having an independent, neutral arbiter providing an objective perspective of the company in real time as a proactive insurance and assurance function. So I think, irrespective of the industry or phase of maturity a startup is in, the best time to start mandating effective corporate governance is now. It's always better late than never, and certainly it will always pay off.
Thank you so much, Tamal, and very much to your point of having a chief integrity officer was something we were just discussing on our previous session as well, the importance of having compliance, integrity, and ethics as a key part of your executive team. So perhaps I can turn it over to Omar of Let's Work. When you talk about the importance of corporate governance in the stage of maturity, Tamal, you mentioned growth trumps all, and Omar, as a relatively new startup, you are already looking to expand into places like Portugal. What, as a new startup, what is your focus? Where did this idea of corporate governance, and specifically, what about it is your focus as you look to expand regionally and now internationally?
So thank you for the question, and thank you so much for having me as part of this panel. I think for us, the main thing that we care about is culture. We're building a team from a team of 2 to now a team of 20. So part of that is how do we maintain a culture that can then result into some formal structure for corporate governance. Right now, we're in the process of closing our first official seed round. And part of that would expand Hamza and I to actually put together some sort of board of directors, which might end up being VCs or perhaps a strategic angel investor. And I think as such a small team right now, we really have to think about, who are we going to bring to basically help us make the right decisions while still maintaining our own internal ethics, our own internal culture. And given the fact that now we have another team that's growing in Portugal, how do we maintain that within each other? So the conversation officially came up in, I think, the summer of this year, where Hamza and I said, we're going to be growing our team to X amount of people. Who are we looking for, and how do we integrate them into the Let's Work culture? It's really important because I think we will essentially look at hiring from the top level, who will then help us grow the team further. If these people that we bring in at the top level don't actually have that kind of trust or kind of informed decision-making process that maybe me and Hamza try to cascade to the rest of the team, then you end up kind of losing a bit of that, which in turn will have a knock-on effect to whoever we bring in as kind of like our board of directors, I'd like to say.
I think it's interesting how corporate governance is also influencing the culture and the type of way that you want to grow and run your business. And I both really for Omar and really to Tia as well, and really for all of our panelists, a lot of tech startups also rely pretty much on a fully remote team. In the case of Tia, I know at GetB, you have a pretty fully remote team across the world. How do you think about building a team culture remotely and creating a structure so that your product can be used by large companies, whether in the UAE or internationally? And what role has this thinking about governance and accountability played in this?
That's a great question. And I think it's not just a startup challenge, but it's a challenge for everyone now. And especially with COVID-19, everyone had to rethink, what does the office mean? And I think flexibility has become a key sort of expectation that everyone now in this virtual world is expecting. So flexibility can, of course, mean different things. We chose to be fully remote and allow people to work from anywhere. That was a very important value for us because we're truly building a global product, a global software. So if we want global perspectives, we also have to allow for that talent to really be anywhere and to be inspired anywhere as well. So for us, it's been an interesting challenge in how we keep the remote sort of sense of community. And to Omar's point on values is really important to us. So when we hire, right from the very beginning, values is incorporated into our interview process. So for us, it's very much, an alignment on values, and that also allows us to hire and attract the right talent with the right mindset. And going to your question on accountability, I think if you look at that hiring funnel and you think about values and mindset, you can have flexibility if you have accountability. And that is a balance, right? And I think that's often very misunderstood in startups. We think, you can have long lunches on the beach and it's super easy lifestyle, but startups are hard. It's a lot of work. And I think if you have the right mindset, if you have the right talent, you can make great things happen. And again, having that kind of flexibility allows you to hire the best talent too. So for us, it all goes down to values. How we keep that alignment, it's, I think, really important to have that human connection first through technology. That's something that we build through our software and our platform as well. But again, doing little things like sending people flowers on their birthday, it goes a long, long way to have that personal touch in a digital world. So that's something that we try to do, is build community. So our core values are trust and community as well. And how do we build community through the work that we do, but also in how we work?
human connections and building communities internally and externally is a very a key point, and something that I think often comes up with tech companies and tech startups. And with that, I'd like to turn it to Behet on Talabat's journey, also pre-IPO and post-IPO as part of Delivery Hero. How did these values and areas of governance really enable Talabat to go for or be part of an IPO and get additional investment? And what is the focus going forward? I know with Talabat, we talk a lot about, the regulation is not, advanced enough with the new technologies in this new remote place. And to Tia's point, startups can easily move quickly and work remotely and grow remotely. But how can how do you work with government when, there is no regulation in place?
Hey, Rania, thanks for having me. Good question. In fact, similar to Tom's introduction earlier, when Delivery Hero was looking into the region of a business to acquire, there was probably a few of them in the market. And what made Talabat stand out is the fact that there is a bit of corporate governance there. So it didn't do really like the startup business in the traditional way, but yet they kept a thin line of maintaining the corporate governance. So the company had, let's say, smart contracts with the partners that they work with. They had sort of shaped and formal processes of doing things, and that what made it more easy for them to be acquired and be selected in this part of time. So that was back around in 2015. And 2017, it's the time when Delivery Hero went to IPO. And for that, there was an evolution of this function. So we introduced the GRC function to take care of this, all the government relation and all the processes within the organization, in addition to the internal audit as well. So, and in our case, there was a very recent example when we are working with the government, and it's I think it's a mutual partnership between both sides, and a big part of it lays in the hand of the business to explain, because obviously they call it disruptive industries for a good reason. It's something that didn't exist before. So in our case, for example, we had the cloud kitchen, and the cloud kitchen was a recently introduced concept, worldwide. We didn't have even a trade license that mentioned this type of activity or anything. So it took a bit of effort to explain, but the good thing or the advantage that we see in operating in this region is the fact that the government and the authorities are really supportive, and they are ready to embrace the technology and help and support. So and the cloud concept, if people don't know, it's a concept of taking a common place where you partition and operate multiple brands within. So there are when it comes to the traditional way of doing things, normally this place would be fully under one trade license. So what we had as a challenge is to go and convince the authorities to give us 15 trade licenses to operate from the same place. And obviously, in different emirates, we had different responses, and some emirates were a bit more faster to understand the concept. Some others needed to see if we're operating one, and then they can replicate. And that's the challenge of understanding and explaining and making things happen. So, and being the first usually is the tougher, because you have to lead the path for the rest of the people to follow.
I think you brought up a really good point, Behet, where, even on the licensing, they are often not updated with the technology that you're all using. So a question really to all of you, and maybe I can direct this to Tia as well. What is the education when there is no regulation there, and compliance is not so straightforward, and you're creating new technologies? how are you, how do you present yourself to large companies or governments that you're looking to do business with, to be your clients? How would you bring someone like Tia, for example, Shalhoub Group on board for new investment? And how do you, close that business deal as well? But this question is really to any of you.
Happy to start from a startup perspective and would love to hear the larger startup perspectives as well. But from our side, I think, we need more discussions, and this region is growing. And that's one of the positives of this region, is that the leadership is open to listen. So I want to start with the first part of your question. And we need more public and private partnerships. We need more discussions between all the different stakeholders. And to Baha's point as well, and with Kareem and ride hailing and all of these different industries, technology will continue to disrupt every single industry that we operate in. So, and technology is exponential, it's not linear in that sense. So it's very important that government stakeholders are having these conversations with innovators, with technology, with startups, and really listening to what's happening on the ground. I think having that open mindset, and especially we're very fortunate here in the UAE and in this region that we have such a forward-thinking government and people who are open to listening. And I think that's really what's setting this region apart compared to a lot of other, more heavy compliance governments. And I think that's a really interesting advantage if we leverage that further. It's also very interesting going back to values, because for us, how we've identified our partners and of our, in essence, our clients has also been around values and mindset. So when we align with potential clients or even potential investors, we also make sure that we understand their thesis, what is it that they're looking at, what is it that they're looking at innovating in, and their mindset around values. So for us, around future of work, for example, Shalhoub is very proud of being an employer of choice and creating, a very nice space to work for their employees. Through our technology, they can also create this future of work movement for people on the shop floor, for example. So there was a strong alignment also around values, mission, and vision. So I think really understanding your core values, really understanding, how you can create that alignment and create that collaboration is really key to defining the future, really.
Values is important, and I think this goes a lot to this idea, what I really like at Kareem, where you talk about ethics and then compliance. And we're having a lot of questions on, for tech startups, as you're growing, particularly for our mature and large companies, but also for the startups, where is that fine line? How does governance, what discussions are happening? What governance is being put in place when you're looking at compliance, where there is no kind of, it's a gray zone, and then technology where there's a lot of conversations and heat on the ethics and integrity, things like data privacy and data. Timol, Baha, if you want to weigh in.
Yeah, I would jump in here. Like the idea now, like most of our life is on our phones, and the cloud follows you everywhere. So all your data, all your files, all your photos. So and there's a thin line here, like really between providing a service and introducing to as a personal life. And we also, what happens, for example, with Meta and Facebook, like even the stock, like being really heavily acknowledged by investors at a point of time, just crashed because of simple things out of this, like on the ethical way of using the data and using it towards benefiting the consumer or the client. So and there's a thin line here, because also all these gig platforms or crowd platform requires like also some certain level of data in order to operate and serve, and in the same time without really getting introduced to the personal life of people. So and here also comes a big role also for the pioneers or the first who operate in the region. So usually by explaining this and the lucky part, as we mentioned earlier, that the people here really listen and understand, and that's what in fact like makes a big difference in operation in this region. So like there's a thin line always, and the right part is really to serve and without really getting into an area that you don't need to step in.
Just to add to that, Rania, so I've been in app development for the last 4 years, I'd say, and obviously there's the two big ones, the Android and iOS store. They're constantly updating their compliance and the different types of data restrictions that we as a application or business have. And I think that is kind of a huge shift, and you can see it changing from where it was in 2018 to where it is today. In June, iOS is releasing something where anyone that has an application on iOS can actually ask the business to completely delete their profile and remove everything. Obviously, I think from a business perspective, there's good and bad sides to this, where from the bad side, it completely affects our kind of development pipeline, where we have to reallocate all resources to this constant changing data restriction. And I think hopefully we'll reach a place where it's kind of a holistic understanding that this is good data, this is a bad use of data. But I think in terms of new businesses that are coming in, they're developing new apps, developing new technologies to come into this this marketplace, which, we're already saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this with the data, which maybe other businesses have. So I think as a global trend, you can see everything is changing towards kind of give the user back their data, because it's getting a bit scary nowadays.
If I may, Rania, I think, Omar, you brought up a great point, and Baha as well. I think, when you're talking about technology and the advancement of technology, it's clear that the regulators at some point or another will get a hold of this, right? And so you have breakthrough precedent-setting technologies proliferating in a multitude of industries. But then what you also see is that at a certain point, whether it's via the industry itself or regulators, compliance comes into the picture. So my posture has always been to plan for that by having effective corporate governance strategies in place. And Rania, you referred to Kareem as a sort of a mature organization, and that's absolutely true. With the acquisition, yet we still have very much the tech startup blood, right? With the advent of the super app, we are venturing into new frontiers, Kareem Pay, into financial services, into a lot of frontier areas where we have not previously. So we still very much need to take care of these issues, and it's still very top of mind. And how we do that, and especially as a compliance professional, being in an environment that is constantly growing, constantly pushing the threshold, what I'm encouraged by is that there's constant discussion around these topics in leadership, in operation, at the operational level. If you don't make this, governance or compliance a part of the discussion, it's simply going to be left behind. And when the focus again is so much on growth, these topics can seem to be boring or stale or even altogether irrelevant. So my position is always to, when you're keeping it in top of mind, again, it's an insurance policy. You're making sure that you're oh, sorry. I think someone's. Yes. So it's like an insurance policy, really, against all of the changes, all of the updates that happen, be it regulatory or from the industry. And that's really the way that you can assure your company is always relevant and in a position to take advantage of whatever opportunities it may be, financial or otherwise.
It is an interesting conversation. I think you brought up a good point, as really everyone did, that corporate governance is an ongoing journey. Compliance, ethics, developing your HR strategy is really, ongoing, whether you're a startup of 1 or 2 years or have been in the business for about a decade and have been post-IPO or any of this. So I'm curious, what is your advice to a lot of our small business owners and really a lot of startups that are founders that are on the call today in the Gulf region? What would you prioritize in this ongoing journey of corporate governance, and what has it meant for you and your company in terms of growth or sustainability?
I would say the corporate governance is an investment that will pay off. So, and the cost of corporate governance in the beginning is much as a startup, normally you have most of the time limited funds and you need to allocate it into some area, and maybe corporate governance will not come as one of them in the beginning. But the cost of doing a corporate governance proper structure from the beginning is definitely a better thing to invest in. So and it pays off. Like, if, as I said, like if you are small and you're growing and you want to get noticed, like one of the key things that investors look at is an area like this. So that would be my advice.
I would jump in and I mean, I wouldn't give advice since we're just new to this, but I would flip the ask maybe. Companies like Talabat, Kareem, and even you guys from the Pearl Initiative, I think for us, a knowledge bank of just best practices, things to avoid would be key for us. At Let's Work, we're kind of lucky. My co-founder is a qualified lawyer. So a lot of this stuff was taken care of, but at Let's Work, obviously we deal with a lot of different startups and SMEs, and constant question about licensing, legality, how to set things up. I think we've had, some great successes in the region, and with initiatives like the Pearl Initiative, I think putting together a knowledge bank that can be accessible to startups like mine or like Tea's would be huge benefit. And that's the education that will make it a lot easier going forward as well.
Yeah. And to Omar's point, I think once you get those foundations right, and to Baha's point as well, it's, the sooner you lay those foundations, the better. But I would also just like to remind earlier startup founders and anyone listening, it really boils down to your values. If you get your values right, that cascades into everything else that you do, be it corporate governance, HR, etc. So getting your core values right from the beginning is the foundation that will then you can build on. And I think, just one last thing that I'd like to leave everyone with is, does this make you proud? And that's often a guiding question that I have, because if it doesn't, that means that something's wrong. So that's also like a moral compass that I like to leave people with as well.
Yeah, maybe I'll just double down or second your excellent point, Tia. I think that is the overarching sort of box you can put all of these compliance governance discussions in, is are you really adding value to the community? So, even if you're doing things legally or in a compliant way, what does that mean to you? And do you understand the impact of your operation has on the community? And if you're doing that in a way that adds value and that ensures that community stakeholders are accounted for, and that your company is not doing anything untoward to your suppliers or to employees or to up and down the supply chain, I think that is really the core. So values is underpins everything, and if you have the right ethical compass where you are really intentional about everything you're doing, then I think governance, ethics, compliance just falls in line as a part of the sort of company DNA, and that this is a natural extension of assuring that your company in the end is a positive actor, positive change agent in society, as opposed to a destructive player, which unfortunately we often see far too much.
Amazing advice and an amazing really call to action to all of you to build this up. And I want to really thank our esteemed executives and panelists for their time and sharing their insights in this ongoing journey. A lot of this is about human connection, and technology is really driven to improve the human connection and improve the connectivity to one another. And grounding that in values is so important when we're looking at governance, working across borders, and using new technologies.